Welcome to Africa Premium News, your front row seat to Africa's power, progress, and truth. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because here, you don't just watch the news, you witness history unfold. A line has been drawn. At a press conference in Pretoria, South Africa's Minister of Trade, Industry, and Competition stands before a cluster of microphones and cameras. His words are measured, deliberate, and quietly explosive. The United States' new tariff policy, he says, effectively nullifies the foundations of the U.S. Africa trade deal. Within hours, his statement travels around the world. Washington is caught off guard. Beijing takes note. For the first time in decades, Africa's largest industrial economy has publicly questioned the fairness of its most important Western trade partnership. For years, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, better known as AGOA, has been the centerpiece of U.S. Africa economic relations. Introduced in 2000, AGOA was designed to grant duty-free access for African exports to the American market. In theory, it was a pathway for African nations to integrate into global trade, diversify economies, and create jobs. In practice, the benefits were uneven. South Africa became one of the largest beneficiaries, exporting cars, metals, citrus, and wine to the United States. But beneath the success stories lay persistent tension over rules, eligibility, and political leverage. Then came the tariffs. Early this year, Washington announced new duties on imported steel, aluminum, and selected manufactured goods, part of a global effort to protect U.S. industry and curb foreign dumping. The decision may have seemed routine in domestic policy terms, but for South Africa, it was a shockwave. The tariffs hit precisely the sectors that anchor South Africa's exports under AGOA. The trade minister's assessment was blunt. These measures render the spirit of AGOA meaningless. In his statement, he argued that the trade framework, once hailed as a symbol of partnership, now feels more like a constraint. When our goods can no longer compete fairly, when access is conditional and unpredictable, then the foundation of cooperation has been eroded. Those words resonated far beyond Pretoria. Across Africa, policymakers, entrepreneurs, and economists began asking the same question. If the West's trade promises can be reversed overnight, where should Africa turn next? The answer, increasingly, points east. In the past decade, China has transformed its relationship with Africa from a resource-based exchange into a multi-layered partnership covering infrastructure, manufacturing, and digital technology. For South Africa, which joined BRICS alongside China, Brazil, Russia, and India in 2010, the shift feels less like a rupture and more like a return to balance. Within the BRICS framework, Pretoria finds diplomatic space to negotiate deals on its own terms and coordinate with nations that share similar development goals. When the trade minister hinted that South Africa would intensify engagement with markets that treat us as equals, few doubted what he meant. Chinese investment in South Africa already exceeds $25 billion, spanning energy, telecommunications, and manufacturing. Beijing is also Pretoria's largest trading partner. The symmetry is unmistakable. As Washington tightens tariffs, China opens new doors. The reaction in Washington was cautious. U.S. officials reiterated their commitment to AGOA and insisted that the new tariffs were not directed at Africa. Yet the optics tell another story. For African policymakers, it confirmed a long-standing suspicion that Western trade policies often serve Western political cycles, not African development agendas. Meanwhile, in Beijing, the news was quietly welcomed. State media framed South Africa's statement as evidence of a maturing global South consensus and highlighted the growing importance of South-South cooperation. Within days, analysts on both continents were debating whether this marks the beginning of a broader African realignment away from Western-centric trade systems. To understand the stakes, one must return to the origins of AGOA. When it was signed into law, Africa accounted for barely 1% of U.S. imports. The initiative sought to reverse that by granting more than 30 eligible countries tariff-free access to over 6,000 product lines. Yet over time, participation fluctuated. Countries were added or suspended depending on U.S. assessments of democracy, labor rights, or foreign policy alignment. The result? AGOA became both an economic and political instrument. For South Africa, eligibility was never guaranteed. In 2015, the U.S. threatened suspension over disputes in poultry and auto exports. Each review cycle rekindled uncertainty. Businesses that depend on multi-year investments often struggled to plan under those conditions. How can we invest? One South African manufacturer asked. If every 4 years we might lose access because of politics? The new U.S. tariffs reignited that frustration. South Africa's steel industry, already grappling with high energy costs and global competition, faces steep levies that could wipe out profit margins. Aluminum exporters face similar hurdles. And for automakers that rely on U.S. demand, the ripple effects could cost thousands of jobs. Economically, the numbers are sobering. South Africa exported over $2.7 billion in goods to the United States under AGOA in the past year alone. A significant portion of those exports now fall under higher tariff categories. For Pretoria, it's not just about lost revenue, it's about trust. Trade policies, once considered stable, now appear vulnerable to domestic politics halfway across the world. Diplomatically, the shift toward China and the broader global south fits a pattern visible across the continent. Nigeria, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Egypt have all deepened ties with Beijing, attracted by infrastructure financing and predictable terms. Within the BRICS Plus expansion, which now includes nations such as Saudi Arabia and Iran, South Africa sees an opportunity to reshape global trade architecture from the inside. Still, officials in Pretoria insist the goal is not confrontation but diversification. In private briefings, the Trade Ministry emphasizes that South Africa will maintain open dialogue with Washington while exploring new frameworks with BRICS members and the African Continental Free Trade Area. The message is nuanced. Africa wants partnerships, not patronage. Economists note that this could be a turning point for AGOA itself. The act is set to expire in 2025, and discussions about its renewal are already underway. South Africa's criticism may influence the tone of those negotiations. If Washington hopes to preserve influence in African markets, it may need to rethink the balance between conditional access and genuine partnership. On the ground, reactions vary. Business leaders worry about market access, while labor unions support the government's push for fairness. We can't compete when our exports are penalized while others receive subsidies, said a representative of South Africa's Metalworkers Federation. We welcome engagement with any country that values reciprocity. Across Africa, commentators interpret the moment as symbolic of a broader awakening. The continent, home to 1.4 billion people and vast mineral wealth, no longer sees itself as a passive participant in global trade. From Abuja to Nairobi, leaders are asserting agency in choosing who builds their railways, who buys their commodities, and under what terms. China's playbook in Africa is straightforward. Offer financing for infrastructure, prioritize mutual political respect, and avoid overt interference in domestic affairs. Critics argue that this approach masks asymmetrical dependencies and potential debt traps. Supporters counter that tangible development, roads, ports, and factories, is a better measure of partnership than rhetoric about aid. South Africa's pivot embodies this tension. In the corridors of the African Union, diplomats whisper about a post-AGOA era where African economies integrate regionally and negotiate collectively with global partners. The African Continental Free Trade Area, launched in 2021, already connects over 50 nations in a single market. Combined with BRICS cooperation and new financial tools such as the New Development Bank, Africa is slowly building the infrastructure to speak with one voice. For Washington, the challenge is strategic. The United States remains a key investor in African energy, tech, and finance, but its trade presence has stagnated while China's has surged. American officials face the task of reconciling domestic industrial priorities with foreign policy ambitions. The current tariffs may be politically popular at home, but they risk alienating partners abroad. European leaders watch closely. The European Union, too, has faced criticism for restrictive trade policies and agricultural subsidies that limit African competitiveness. South Africa's defiance could inspire similar debates in other African capitals. Meanwhile, at the BRICS headquarters in Shanghai, preparations are underway for the next summit. South African officials are expected to propose expanded trade facilitation mechanisms and localized currency settlements, measures that would further reduce dependency on the U.S. dollar. Such initiatives align neatly with China's long-term goal of promoting the yuan as an international currency. Yet for all the geopolitics, the story remains grounded in the practical realities of trade. For South Africa's exporters, every tariff percentage point translates into layoffs, wage cuts, or lost contracts. For consumers, higher costs ripple through the economy. The government's calculus is simple. If existing frameworks no longer deliver stability, new ones must be forged. At the same time, South Africa's pivot does not mean isolation from the West. The nation's economy is too diversified, its private sector too globalized. Rather, it signals a strategic rebalancing, a recognition that in a multipolar world, survival depends on flexibility. The minister's statement, though diplomatic, carries undertones of quiet confidence. "We will trade with all who trade fairly," he concluded, "and we will build partnerships that respect mutual growth." Behind those words lies a larger truth. Africa is no longer waiting for permission to define its economic destiny. In Washington, analysts debate the implications. Some warn of an erosion of U.S. influence. Others argue it's a wake-up call to modernize policy. In Beijing, strategists see opportunity, a chance to deepen engagement through pragmatic cooperation. And across Africa, younger generations watch this realignment unfold online, shaping perceptions of power, justice, and independence. The coming years will reveal whether this moment marks a rupture or a redefinition. If AGOA is renewed under new terms that address African concerns, partnership could survive. If not, the gravitational pull of the global South will only grow stronger. As global supply chains shift and the world fragments into competing trade blocs, Africa's choices carry unprecedented weight. Its resources fuel the energy transition, its demographics drive consumption, its stability influences global markets. The continent once viewed as peripheral is now central. For South Africa, standing at the crossroads of old alliances and new possibilities, the path forward will require diplomacy, vision, and pragmatism. Yet the symbolism of this moment cannot be overstated. A nation that fought for sovereignty in politics is now asserting sovereignty in trade. In the background, the rhythm of container ships, cargo planes, and trains continues. Goods move, markets adapt, and history records the shifts not in declarations but in data. New trade routes, new currencies, new alliances. The world's economic map is being redrawn, and Africa's signature is finally visible on it. The microphones in Pretoria have long gone silent, but the echo of that press conference still travels through boardrooms and ministries across the globe. It is the sound of a continent signaling that partnership, not patronage, will define its future. This is African Premium News, where Africa speaks for itself. Don't miss a story that matters. Click subscribe, ring that bell, and stay ahead of the headlines. Africa's future starts right here.